Good debate. Our next presenter is David Gross, who is going to talk to us about Phoenix Song and the Order of Virtues. So I will turn it over to David.
Thank you. I'm going to use my one prop here. That's a famous bird that we all know very well. It's an honor to be here, and I'd like to thank Chestnut Hill College for inviting me back and bringing me into the Harry Potter world again. I missed last year, and it's good to be back. I'd like to dedicate my talk right now, in fact, to my wife, who passed away from cancer earlier this year, and it was a great inspiration to me. 13 years I've been doing conferences around the country related to the Harry Potter series and other fantasy literature, so I'd like to just honor her by this moment, this day as well. So thank you. Harry Potter exemplifies courage as a major virtue throughout the 7-book series. Of course, the title Harry Potter, Phoenix Song, and the Order of Virtues. Switch things around with the Order of Phoenix a little bit. We're going to get to that. So we'll explore the mythical symbolism behind the Phoenix, the virtue of courage that goes along with Harry's journey, and how it relates to Phoenix Song and to the symbols of magical creatures that we know so well. And now moving into Fantastic Beasts, we're learning a little bit more about each of them. So courage is also J.K. Rowling's favorite virtue, as it turns out. And it's presented as along with all the other major virtues throughout the books, particularly the strong emphasis on love and the power of love and magic that is the greatest magic of all. So J.R. Tolkien stated this in his journals, that fairy or fantasy literature especially can be useful in helping young people or older people identify and internalize virtues, because the one critical component of the story is, of course, is pitting good against evil, or light versus darkness. And Bruno Bettelheim also agrees with this. He's a child psychologist and a famous writer. And he wrote that a child imagines as he suffers or she suffers with the hero under trials and tribulations within the books. And he also triumphs with that hero in the virtues that are victorious. A deeper view of this is that the inner and outer struggles that are internalized within us are also an imprint of the morality of the story that also comes into the reader's life, or can be. In J.K. Rowling's Fantastic Beasts book, favorite of mine, by the way, I'm in my 52nd printing of this by 2017, so I'm a little bit older than the 1926 version we saw in the movies. Phoenix Song is reputed in the books of Harry Potter to increase the courage of the pure in heart and to strike fear in the hearts of the impure. We're going to get into that in a minute with Voldemort. But there are various symbolic meanings related to the mythic Phoenix. Of course, Fawkes is the most famous one we know in the stories. And why this symbol is key to Harry's journey. Rowling's work is enriched, of course, by mythology. Many of the names, the plots, characters are rooted within the mythological traditions, drawing on stories of ancient mythological cultures from Europe, across Asia, across India, and many other cultures, including North America now, as we're seeing in a new series. So you see the use of the unicorn. It's a symbol, multiple symbol of purity and life. And we saw that in Philosopher's Stone, and how that portrayed danger to Voldemort because he would use the unicorn. The white stag, Harry's Patronus, a great famous symbol of Eastern mythology, is a symbol in mythical terms of renewal and resurrection as Christianity slowly moved into Europe and became a dual symbol. Native Americans have the Thunderbird, who is closely related in a way to the Phoenix, as we're finding out. And in studying Lakota culture, the Algonquin, the Navajo, particularly those three tribes ascribe the Thunderbird great power and strength and power over the elements of the earth, which you saw in the movie, which he does in New York, particularly, saves New York, and is also a symbol of morality to a judgment of mankind in Native American culture and religion. So some very interesting similarities between both of them, the Phoenix and the Thunderbird. But the Phoenix, in my opinion, was chosen by Rowling as a symbol to mirror the sacrifice that Harry Potter would eventually make in Deathly Hallows. A phoenix is identified as the mythical and magical bird that exists in Greek, Egyptian, and Chinese mythologies. Books on these mythological creatures mention the phoenix as many associations with the sun's cycles, a symbol of life, a symbol of fire. So again, the phoenix obtains its new life by bursting the flame, as you see in Fox in the stories, and rising from its ashes into a new creature, the same creature coming back to life from its predecessor. Now, in pre-Christian and Middle Ages and in early Christian works, the phoenix is mentioned in a number of different works, such as Clement of Rome, Tertullian wrote of the phoenix, in Christian and Roman Catholic documents, which is interesting. So it's interesting to note that in ancient Greek manuscripts, they found that two elements within the phoenix's nest or spire that's part of its creation contain two elements called frankincense and myrrh. Who do you think is associated with frankincense and myrrh? So it's, of course, and through those elements of Christianity moving into Europe became a historical image of the resurrection of Jesus Christ in the symbol. The Harry Potter books now show us the sacrificial courage now that Harry and his friends have to face in the danger of death to protect the wizarding world and the innocent from the Dark Lord. For example, in Chamber of Secrets, Fawkes the Phoenix swoops down into the chamber in a flaming fire. The song of the Phoenix, again, here we go, the song, fills Harry with renewed courage. The sound was eerie, Rowling writes, spine-tingling and unearthly. Harry's heart was vibrating within him, drawing on the courage that Fawkes was providing through the elements of this magical rescue in the chamber. We see a symbolic resurrection take place when Harry is wounded by the poison fang of the basilisk in the battle. With moments and seconds from death, Fawkes swoops in, drops his tears on Harry's wound, and he's brought back to life. Fawkes then flies Harry, Ginny, Ron, and even Gilderoy out of the Chamber of Secrets, out of the depths of the earth, by the magical strength of this resurrection verb, this symbol. So the elements of the virtue of loyalty and love for Dumbledore come through to Harry to bring Fawkes to his rescue. And similarly in the Goblet of Fire, Harry's courage is strengthened again in the graveyard encounter with Voldemort. Remember the duel. Their wands magically connect in a priori incantatem. It's a very, very rare magic. It happens only when the two wands contain the same element. As the golden beams of light begin to splinter around them, and the sound of hope of the Phoenix song comes in and fills Harry with a great courage and strength. Voldemort, however, is struck with fear, and he begins to behold the elements of those that he murdered appearing above him in a golden dome of light, while the Phoenix song and Fawkes is flying in to provide Harry with that courage at that moment of life and death. So he beholds all those that he had demised, and it comes into a striking fear to Voldemort. But in the Order of Phoenix, we see again, Fawkes appears in a pivotal moment in the battle at the Department of Mysteries. When Voldemort delivers a killing curse to Dumbledore, Fawkes swoops in and gathers the killing curse, drops to the ground in flames, and a green flash of light, and rises again from the ashes. We're getting this parallel here, constant theme that Rowling's writing about life after death, life coming to life again in Deathly Hallows, has been spoken about before. So the Phoenix is symbolically a truly immortal and indestructible creature, a mortal symbol of the chosen one, Harry Potter, who will one day resurge from dormancy in the forest to vanquish the wizarding world from the Dark Lord. So courage is this virtue, that's great strength that Rowling is presenting, that allows us to stand firm against our fears and our fear of death, as well as what Harry was facing, for the greater good of others. The world around us right now is facing many challenges in this right now as we stand here, as we're in this conference. So why was it so difficult for Voldemort to accept either of these two virtues? Interesting question. Courage or love? Because the Dark Lord in his life, his selfishness in his life alone was his greatest good, not the good of others. His love was only for himself. There's nothing in the Dark Lord's universe worth dying for. He cannot recognize anything that transcends himself. It's a whole question of things that are going on in our culture right now. But Rowling states in this interview that she gave in 2008, he regards death itself as ignominious. He thinks of it as a shameful human weakness, and that his worst fear in itself is death, which is why he went after the Horcruxes and created those to keep himself immortal, which turns out to be his demise in the end. So Harry, in contrast, is born into a world of suffering with death, the death of his biological parents. That experience of suffering continues through the mistreatment of his aunt and uncle, Dudley, Finally, the long series of attacks through the 7-book series by Voldemort, both externally and internally in his life, in Hogwarts while he's a student. But now we know he did have those weak moments along the way. He wasn't strong through all of it, particularly in Order of the Phoenix. Dumbledore, he felt deserted him. His friends had walked away. He was kind of in this aloneness up until the end of the book, but now his friends begin to encourage him. Ron and Hermione rejoin him and fill those moments again with courage. His strength in facing danger and tragedy were born in suffering. That's key to Harry's story. C.S. Lewis, a Christian apologist in Oxford, stated this, that suffering in a suffering hero produces a reservoir within that increases our and their capacity to love. The elements of courage and suffering in the suffering hero standing in a battleground of both Harry's fictional world and the world we're in right now. That many things, great things have been spoken of in this conference about what the elements of prejudice and hatred and racism and everything are facing our world, are facing us and our choices in this path of life. And that it could lead us to this gift that Albus Dumbledore stated is the greatest magic of all, love. Right? In the biblical sense, to love one another, overcome those elements of darkness. In King's Cross, the chapter in Deathly Hallows, Albus Dumbledore stated that he struggled with this choice of power in the pursuit of the Hallows with Gellert Grindelwald, who's now an enemy of mine, as is going to turn out in the movies coming up. So this is going to be a challenge for me as Newt Scamander. So Grindelwald is now our enemy, but he's suffered a death of his sister Ariana, tragically, because of this confusion he had with power, and the love of power and the love of the wrong things in facing the decision of life. So in light of Harry's self-sacrifice in the forest to save his friends in the Wizarding World from the Dark Lord, Dumbledore calls Harry the better man. So as we continue this journey into the Forbidden Forest, we learn that the forest is a key element, and you see it in many different elements of different fantasy stories, but it deals with Celtic mythology, the landscape of Celtic countries and entities and the spirit world that are in different time and space. Native American myths, as I've studied through coming to the United States in the Newt Scamander role now, describe the 4 elements and the seasons of the Great Spirit and the forests and landscapes where their tribes dwell in the land and in the earth. In an interview in 2008, Rowling says this, everything I've written in these 7 books was thought of for that precise moment when Harry goes into that forest. That moment is at the heart of all the books. And for me, it is the last truth of the story. That self-sacrificing love. All the political things are important. We need to learn, we need to grow and move forward in our culture, but the greatest is self-sacrifice. We give ourselves to others. This was Rowling's quote, is a good quote. So the virtue of Harry's self-sacrifice in the forest provides that key moment that Rowling is leading us to from the very first book. Travis Prinzi, in his book Harry Potter and Imagination, states this, while death is tragic, to the well-organized mind it need not be feared. Indeed, one day it will be defeated. Harry became the first person in the wizarding world to defeat death, once because of the self-sacrificial love of his mother, and another because he self-sacrificed himself in the forest to defeat Voldemort. We now have this same love, self-sacrificial case to give into our lives here in the world we live in today through these literary works toward changing the hearts and minds of those around us in the time that we have here. That's what Rowling, I think, is kind of giving us that picture of in their series, where we see all the trials and tribulations around us. And in the famous words of another wizard who once stated this for what the world and the times in which we live, many have despaired to see such times that we're living in now, but that's not for us to decide. All we have to do to decide for ourselves in this world is what to do with the time that is given to us. Harry Potter is a fantasy tale that is multidimensional, with various genres in the same work and multi-moral decisions and dimensions that contrast the evil of Voldemort, the greed of the Malfoys, materialism of the Dursleys, misuse of power of the Ministry of Magic, and a wizarding world that are supposedly on the side of good, and we find are very confused about what good is. The misuse of Sirius Black, who was falsely accused in Azkaban. We could go on with the list of the misuse of house elves, the slavery and racism and prejudice. of the ministry towards centaurs and giants and werewolves. We could make a list, but the virtue of diversity and fidelity and love, exemplified by Albus Dumbledore in this story, in this series, employs many of these so-called outcasts to teach at Hogwarts. There's an example that he gives us. They were outcast by the ministry, but he shows the true value of friendship and loyalty. And it's imprinted on Luna Lovegood's ceiling that we've heard of earlier in this day. Friends, 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 overcoming all things, and the Dark Lord can't conceive it. But we find out in the wizarding community that destruction of the Dark Lord takes both sexes to work together. It's not a gender thing, it's a community. It's a community within the literary world, it can be a community within our own world. All of us need to work together, equally, to defeat darkness and death. So what's the source of the high virtuous ideals that are presented in the Harry Potter series? I believe it comes from within J.K. Rowling's own life and faith. Just as it did for C.S. Lewis, Charles Dickens, J.R. Tolkien. As Rowling stated in a New York Times article in 2007, it turns out Rowling, like her hero Harry, was a seeker, and is a seeker. Her seeking leads in a different direction, as she says, about having a great religious curiosity when she was a young child. And as she would go to church by herself, leaving her family behind and going by on her own, she still attends regularly in Scotland, and her children are all baptized in the Church of Scotland. So curiously, her Christian defenders have always thought that her faith shined through in her stories. One commentator called the Harry Potter series the greatest opportunity the evangelical church has ever missed. One of them is standing here today because I realized that 13 years ago when I started reading the books with my daughter. Rowling states that at least as much as they've been attacked from a theological point of view, these books have been lauded and taken into pulpit. And the most interesting and satisfying thing for me, she says, is this. It's been by several different faiths. Rowling has inspired so many to imagine better, and for us, and to live better. And the Harry Potter series engages this point in an interdisciplinary fashion. As we see, imagination, especially the exercise of moral imagination, is essentially practical. Rather than just being an opportunity for escapism, which these books can, the Harry Potter books call us to face the human condition. And in a sense, now Newt is going to be in that same predicament now going forward in Fantastic Beasts. But he's a marked man. So we have that possibility in our own lives. We can choose to do what is right or what is easy in our own culture, in our own communities. In Rowling's faith life, it is indeed within her canon within the canon that seems to fulfill her greatest satisfaction. She gave us these truths of self-sacrifice and the highest good, that we should give these things in a matter of fact to others around us in our communities that we live here. The more we practice these virtues, the more we believe, the more we can set up to be heroic journeys and journeymen and women in our own lives and the culture around us. I'll end with this quote. Novelist and Christian apologist C.S. Lewis says this in one of his letters called Miracles. The truth that first appears in mythical form, and then by a long process of condensing, working through the stories, focusing, finally becomes incarnate in history. The history now that we all know from here and we live in, as well as the history of our faith. This involves the belief that myth in general, at its best, is a real though unfocused gleam of divine truth falling on the human imagination for all of us. That's what we carry out to the world we leave from this conference. Thank you.